Chapter 6 of Aunt Jane's Nieces. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gage. Aunt Jane's Nieces by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 6 The Boy. Leaving the mistress of Elmhurst among her flowers, Silas Watson walked slowly and thoughtfully along the paths until he reached the extreme left wing of the rambling old mansion. Here, half hidden by tangled vines of climbing roses, he came to a flight of steps leading to an iron-railed balcony, and beyond this was a narrow stairway to the rooms in the upper part of the wing. Miss Merrick, however ungenerous she might have been to others, had always maintained Elmhurst in a fairly lavish manner. There were plenty of servants to look after the house and gardens, and there were good horses in the stables. Whenever her health permitted she dined in state each evening in the great dining-room, solitary and dignified, unless on rare occasions her one familiar, Silas Watson, occupied the seat opposite her. The boy, as he was contemptuously called, was never permitted to enter this room. Indeed, it would be difficult to define exactly Kenneth Forbes' position at Elmhurst. He had lived there ever since his mother's death, when, a silent and unattractive lad of 8, Mr. Watson had brought him to Jane Merrick and insisted upon her providing a home for Tom Bradley's orphaned nephew. She accepted the obligation reluctantly enough, giving the child a small room in the left wing, as far removed from her own apartments as possible, and transferring all details of his care to Misery Agnew, the old housekeeper. Misery endeavored to do her duty by the boy, but appreciating the scant courtesy with which he was treated by her mistress, it is not surprising the old woman regarded him merely as a dependent and left him mostly to his own devices. Kenneth, even in his first days at Elmhurst, knew that his presence was disagreeable to Miss Jane, and as the years dragged on he grew shy and retiring, longing to break away from his unpleasant surroundings, but knowing of no other place where he would be more welcome. His only real friend was the lawyer, who neglected no opportunity to visit the boy and chat with him, in his cheery manner. Mr. Watson also arranged with the son of the village curate to tutor Kenneth and prepare him for college. But either the tutor was incompetent or the pupil did not apply himself, for at 20 Kenneth Forbes was very ignorant indeed, and seemed not to apply himself properly to his books. He was short of stature and thin, with a sad, drawn face and manners that even his staunch friend, Silas Watson, admitted were awkward and unprepossessing. What he might have been under different conditions or with different treatment could only be imagined. Slowly climbing the stairs to the little room Kenneth inhabited, Mr. Watson was forced to conclude, with a sigh of regret, that he could not blame Miss Jane for wishing to find a more desirable heir to her estate than this graceless, sullen youth who had been thrust upon her by a thoughtless request contained in the will of her dead lover, a request that she determined to fulfill literally, as it only required her to look after Tom's relatives, and did not oblige her to leave Kenneth her property. Yet, strange as it may seem, the old lawyer was exceedingly fond of the boy, and longed to see him the master of Elmhurst. Sometimes when they were alone, Kenneth forgot his sense of injury and dependence, and spoke so well and with such animation that Mr. Watson was astonished, and believed that hidden underneath the mask of reserve was another entirely different personality, that in the years to come might change the entire nature of the neglected youth, and win for him the respect and admiration of the world. But these fits of brightness and geniality were rare. Only the lawyer had as yet discovered them. To-day he found the boy lying listlessly upon the window-seat, an open book in his hand, but his eyes fixed dreamily upon the grove of huge elm trees that covered the distant hills. "Morning, Ken," said he, briefly, sitting beside his young friend and taking the book in his own. The margins of the printed pages were fairly covered with drawings of every description. The far-away trees were there, and the nearby rose gardens. There was a cat spitting at an angry dog. Caricatures of old Misery and James the gardener, and of Aunt Jane, and even Silas Watson himself, all so clearly depicted that the lawyer suddenly wondered if they were not clever, and an evidence of genius. But the boy turned to look at him, and the next moment seized the book from his grasp and sent it flying through the open window, uttering at the same time a rude exclamation of impatience. The lawyer quietly lighted his pipe. "Why did you do that, Kenneth?" he asked. "The pictures are clever enough to be preserved. I did not know you have a talent for drawing." The boy glanced at him. but answered nothing, and the lawyer thought best not to pursue the subject. After smoking a moment in silence, he remarked, "Your aunt is failing fast." Although no relative, Kenneth had been accustomed to speak of Jane Merrick as his aunt. Getting neither word nor look in reply, the lawyer presently continued, "I do not think she will live much longer." The boy stared from the window and drummed on the sill with his fingers. "When she dies," said Mr. Watson in a musing tone, "there will be a new mistress at Elmhurst, and you will have to move out." The boy now turned to look at him, inquiringly. "You are 20, and you are not ready for college. You would be of no use in the commercial world. You have not even the capacity to become a clerk. What will you do, Kenneth? Where will you go?" The boy shrugged his shoulders. "When will Aunt Jane die?" he asked. "I hope she will live many days yet. She may die to-morrow." "When she does I'll answer your question," said the boy, roughly. "When I'm turned out of this place, which is part prison and part paradise, I'll do something. I don't know what, and I won't bother about it till the time comes, but I'll do something." "Could you earn a living?" asked the old lawyer. "Perhaps not, but I'll get one. Will I be a beggar?" "I don't know. It depends on whether Aunt Jane leaves you anything in her will." "I hope she won't leave me a cent," cried the boy, with sudden fierceness. "I hate her, and will be glad when she is dead and out of my way." Kenneth, lad!" "I hate her," he persisted, with blazing eyes. "She has insulted me, scorned me, humiliated me every moment since I have known her. I'll be glad to have her die, and I don't want a cent of her miserable money." "Money," remarked the old man, knocking the ashes from his pipe, "is very necessary to one who is incompetent to earn his salt. And the money she leaves you, if she really does leave you any, won't be hers, remember, but your Uncle Tom's." "Uncle Tom was good to my father," said the boy, softening. "Well, Uncle Tom gave his money to Aunt Jane, whom he had expected to marry, but he asked her to care for his relatives, and she'll doubtless give you enough to live on. But the place will go to some one else, and that means you must move on." "Who will have Elmhurst?" asked the boy. "One of your aunt's nieces, probably. She has 3, it seems, all of them young girls, and she has invited them to come here to visit her." "Girls? Girls at Elmhurst?" cried the boy, shrinking back with a look of terror in his eyes. "To be sure. One of the nieces, it seems, refuses to come, but there will be 2 of them to scramble for your aunt's affection." "She has none," declared the boy. "Or her money, which is the same thing. The one she likes the best will get the estate." Kenneth smiled, and with the change of expression his face lighted wonderfully. "Poor aunt," he said. "Almost I am tempted to be sorry for her. 2 girls, fighting one against the other for Elmhurst, and both fawning before a cruel and malicious old woman who could never love any one but herself." "And her flowers," suggested the lawyer. "Oh, yes, and perhaps James. Tell me, why should she love James, who is a mere gardener, and hate me? James tends the flowers, and the flowers are Jane Merrick's very life. Isn't that the explanation?" "I don't know." "The girls need not worry you, Kenneth. It will be easy for you to keep out of their way." "When will they come?" "Next week, I believe." The boy looked around helplessly, with the air of a caged tiger. "Perhaps they won't know I'm here," he said. "Perhaps not. I'll tell Misery to bring all your meals to this room, and no one ever comes to this end of the garden. But if they find you, Kenneth, and scare you out of your den, run over to me, and I'll keep you safe until the girls are gone." "Thank you, Mr. Watson," more graciously than was his wont. "It isn't that I'm afraid of girls, you know, but they may want to insult me just as their aunt does, and I couldn't bear any more cruelty." "I know nothing about them," said the lawyer, "so I can't vouch in any way for Aunt Jane's nieces. But they are young, and it is probable they'll be as shy and uncomfortable here at Elmhurst as you are yourself. And after all, Kenneth, boy, the most important thing just now is your own future. What in the world is to become of you?" "Oh, that," answered the boy, relapsing into his sullen mood. "I can't see that it matters much one way or another. Anyhow, I'll not bother my head about it until the time comes, and as far as you're concerned, it's none of your business." End of chapter 6. Seven of Aunt Jane's Nieces. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gage. Aunt Jane's Nieces by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 7 The First Warning For a day or two Jane Merrick seemed to improve in health. Indeed, Martha Phibbs declared her mistress was better than she had been for weeks. Then one night the old attendant was awakened by a scream, and rushed to her mistress's side. "What is it, ma'am?" she asked, tremblingly. "My leg! I can't move my leg!" gasped the mistress of Elmhurst. "Rub it, you old fool! Rub it till you drop, and see if you can bring back the life to it." Martha rubbed, of course, but the task was useless. Oscar the groom was sent on horseback for the nearest doctor, who came just as day was breaking. He gave the old woman a brief examination and shook his head. "It's the first warning," said he, "but nothing to be frightened about. That is, for the present." "Is it paralysis?" asked Jane Merrick. "Yes, a slight stroke." "But I'll have another?" "Perhaps, in time." "How long?" "It may be a week, or a month, or a year. Sometimes there is never another stroke. Don't worry, ma'am. Just lie still and be comfortable." "Humph!" grunted the old woman. But she became more composed and obeyed the doctor's instructions with unwonted meekness. Silas Watson arrived during the forenoon, and pressed her thin hand with real sympathy, for these two were friends despite the great difference in their temperaments. "Shall I draw your will, Jane?" he asked. "No," she snapped. "I'm not going to die just yet, I assure you. I shall live to carry out my plans, Silas." She did live, and grew better as the days wore on, although she never recovered the use of the paralyzed limb. Each day Phibbs drew the invalid chair to the porch, and old James lifted it to the garden walk, where his mistress might enjoy the flowers he so carefully and skilfully tended. They seldom spoke together, these two, yet there seemed a strange bond of sympathy between them. At last the 1st of July arrived, and Oscar was dispatched to the railway station, 4 miles distant, to meet Miss Elizabeth de Graf, the first of the nieces to appear in answer to Jane Merrick's invitation. Beth looked very charming and fresh in her new gown, and she greeted her aunt with a calm graciousness that would have amazed the professor to behold. She had observed carefully the grandeur and beauty of Elmhurst as she drove through the grounds, and instantly decided the place was worth an effort to win. "So this is Elizabeth, is it?" asked Aunt Jane, as the girl stood before her for inspection. "You may kiss me, child." Elizabeth advanced, striving to quell the antipathy she felt to kiss the stern-featured old woman, and touched her lips to the wrinkled forehead. Jane Merrick laughed, a bit sneeringly, while Beth drew back, still composed, and looked at her relative enquiringly. "Well, what do you think of me?" demanded Aunt Jane, as if embarrassed at the scrutiny she received. "Surely it is too early to ask me that," replied Beth, gently. "I am going to try to like you, and my first sight of my new aunt leads me to hope I shall succeed." "Why shouldn't you like me?" cried the old woman. "Why must you try to like your mother's sister?" Beth flushed. She had promised herself not to become angry or discomposed, whatever her aunt might say or do. But before she could control herself an indignant expression flashed across her face, and Jane Merrick saw it. "There are reasons," said Beth, slowly, "why your name is seldom mentioned in my father's family. Until your letter came I scarcely knew I possessed an aunt. It was your desire we should become better acquainted, and I am here for that purpose. I hope we shall become friends, Aunt Jane, but until then it is better we should not discuss the past." The woman frowned. It was not difficult for her to read the character of the child before her, and she knew intuitively that Beth was strongly prejudiced against her, but was honestly trying not to allow that prejudice to influence her. She decided to postpone further interrogations until another time. "Your journey has tired you," she said, sharply. "I'll have Misery show you to your room." She touched a bell beside her. "I'm not tired, but I'll go to my room, if you please," answered Beth, who realized that she had in some way failed to make as favorable an impression as she had hoped. "When may I see you again?" "When I send for you," snapped Aunt Jane, as the housekeeper entered. "I suppose you know I'm a paralytic and liable to die at any time." "I am very sorry," said Beth, hesitatingly. "You do not seem very ill." "I'm on my last legs. I may not live an hour, but that's none of your business, I suppose. By the way, I expect your cousin on the afternoon train." Beth gave a start of surprise. "My cousin?" she asked. "Yes, Louise Merrick." "Oh," said Beth, and stopped short. "What do you mean by that?" enquired Aunt Jane, with a smile that was rather malicious. "I did not know I had a cousin," said the girl. "That is," correcting herself, "I did not know whether Louise Merrick was alive or not. Mother has mentioned her name once or twice in my presence, but not lately." "Well, she's alive, very much alive, I believe, and she's coming to visit me while you are here. I expect you to be friends." "To be sure," said Beth, nevertheless discomfited at the news. "We dine at 7," said Aunt Jane. "I always lunch in my own room, and you may do the same." And with a wave of her thin hand she dismissed the girl, who thoughtfully followed the old housekeeper through the halls. It was not going to be an easy task to win this old woman's affection. Already she rebelled at the necessity of undertaking so distasteful a venture, and wondered if she had not made a mistake in trying to curb her natural frankness, and to conciliate a creature whose very nature seemed antagonistic to her own. And this new cousin, Louise Merrick, why was she coming to Elmhurst? To compete for the prize Beth had already determined to win? In that case, she must consider carefully her line of action, that no rival might deprive her of this great estate. Beth felt that she could fight savagely for an object she so much desired. Her very muscles hardened and grew tense at the thought of conflict as she walked down the corridor in the wake of old Misery, the housekeeper. She had always resented the sordid life at Cloverton. She had been discontented with her lot since earliest girlhood, and longed to escape the constant bickerings of her parents and their vain struggles to obtain enough money to keep up appearances and drive the wolf from the door. And here was an opportunity to win a fortune and a home beautiful enough for a royal princess. All that was necessary was to gain the esteem of a crabbed, garrulous old woman, who had doubtless but a few more weeks to live. It must be done, in one way or another. But how? How could she outwit this unknown cousin, and inspire the love of Aunt Jane? "If there's any stuff of the right sort in my nature," decided the girl, as she entered her pretty bedchamber and threw herself into a chair, "I'll find a way to win out. One thing is certain, I'll never again have another chance at so fine a fortune, and if I fail to get it I shall deserve to live in poverty for ever afterward." Suddenly she noticed the old housekeeper standing before her and regarding her with a kindly interest. In an instant she sprang up, threw her arms around Misery, and kissed her furrowed cheek. "Thank you for being so kind," said she. "I've never been away from home before, and you must be a mother to me while I'm at Elmhurst." Old Misery smiled and stroked the girl's glossy head. "Bless the child," she said, delightedly. "Of course I'll be a mother to you. You'll need a bit of comforting now and then, my dear, if you're going to live with Jane Merrick." "Is she cross?" asked Beth, softly. "At times she's a fiend," confided the old housekeeper, in almost a whisper. "But don't you mind her tantrums or lay 'em to heart, and you'll get along with her all right." "Thank you," said the girl. "I'll try not to mind." "Do you need anything else, dearie?" asked Misery, with a glance around the room. "Nothing at all, thank you." The housekeeper nodded, and softly withdrew. "That was one brilliant move, at any rate," said Beth to herself, as she laid aside her hat and prepared to unstrap her small trunk. "I've made a friend at Elmhurst who will be of use to me, and I shall make more before long. Come as soon as you like, Cousin Louise. You'll have to be more clever than I am if you hope to win Elmhurst." End of chapter 7. Of Aunt Jane's Nieces. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gage. Aunt Jane's Nieces by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 8. The Diplomat. Aunt Jane was in her garden, enjoying the flowers. This was her especial garden, surrounded by a high box hedge, and quite distinct from the vast expanse of shrubbery and flower beds which lent so much to the beauty of the grounds at Elmhurst. Aunt Jane knew and loved every inch of her property. She had watched the shrubs personally for many years, and planned all the alterations and the construction of the flower beds, which James had so successfully attended to. Each morning, when her health permitted, she had inspected the greenhouses and issued her brief orders. Brief because her slightest word to the old gardener incurred the fulfillment of her wishes. But this bit of garden adjoining her own rooms was her especial pride, and contained the choicest plants she had been able to secure. So, since she had been confined to her chair, the place had almost attained to the dignity of a private drawing room, and on bright days she spent many hours here, delighting to feast her eyes with the rich colouring of the flowers and to inhale their fragrance. For however gruff Jane Merrick might be to the people with whom she came in contact, she was always tender to her beloved flowers, and her nature invariably softened when in their presence. By and by Oscar the groom stepped through an opening in the hedge and touched his hat. "Has my niece arrived?" asked his mistress sharply. "She's on the way, mum," the man answered, grinning. "She stopped outside the grounds to pick wild flowers, and said I was to tell you she'd walk the rest of the way." "To pick wild flowers?" "That's what she said, mum. She's that fond of 'em she couldn't resist it. I was to come and tell you this, mum, and she'll follow me directly." Aunt Jane stared at the man sternly, and he turned toward her an unmoved countenance. Oscar had been sent to the station to meet Louise Merrick and drive her to Elmhurst. But this strange freak on the part of her guest set the old woman thinking what her object could be. Wild flowers were well enough in their way, but those adjoining the grounds of Elmhurst were very ordinary and unattractive, and Miss Merrick's aunt was expecting her. Perhaps A sudden light illumined the mystery. "See here, Oscar, has this girl been questioning you?" "She asked a few questions, mum." "About me?" "Some of 'em, mum, if I remember right, mum, was about you." "And you told her I was fond of flowers?" "I may have just mentioned that you liked 'em, mum." Aunt Jane gave a scornful snort, and the man responded in a curious way. He winked slowly and laboriously, still retaining the solemn expression on his face. "You may go, Oscar. Have the girl's luggage placed in her room." "Yes, mum." He touched his hat and then withdrew, leaving Jane Merrick with a frown upon her brow that was not caused by his seeming impertinence. Presently a slight and graceful form darted through the opening in the hedge and approached the chair wherein Jane Merrick reclined. "Oh, my dear, dear aunt!" cried Louise. "How glad I am to see you at last, and how good of you to let me come here!" And she bent over and kissed the stern, unresponsive face with an enthusiasm delightful to behold. "This is Louise, I suppose," said Aunt Jane stiffly. "You are welcome to Elmhurst." "Tell me how you are," continued the girl, kneeling beside the chair and taking the withered hands gently in her own. "Do you suffer any? And are you getting better, dear aunt, in this beautiful garden with the birds and the sunshine?" "Get up," said the elder woman, roughly. "You're spoiling your gown." Louise laughed gaily. "Never mind the gown," she answered. "Tell me about yourself. I've been so anxious since your last letter." Aunt Jane's countenance relaxed a trifle. To speak of her broken health always gave her a sort of grim satisfaction. "I'm dying, as you can plainly see," she announced. "My days are numbered, Louise. If you stay long enough, you can gather wild flowers for my coffin." Louise flushed a trifle. A bunch of buttercups and forget-me-nots was fastened to her girdle, and she had placed a few marguerites in her hair. "Don't laugh at these poor things," she said, deprecatingly. "I'm so fond of flowers, and we find none growing wild in the cities, you know." Jane Merrick looked at her reflectively. "How old are you, Louise?" she asked. "Just 17, aunt." "I had forgotten you are so old as that. Let me see. Elizabeth cannot be more than 15. "Elizabeth?" "Elizabeth de Graf, your cousin. She arrived at Elmhurst this morning, and will be your companion while you are here." "That is nice," said Louise. "I hope you will be friends." "Why not, aunt? I haven't known much of my relations in the past, you know, so it pleases me to find an aunt and a cousin at the same time. I am sure I shall love you both. Let me fix your pillow. You do not seem comfortable. There, isn't that better?" patting the pillow deftly. "I'm afraid you have needed more loving care than a paid attendant can give you," glancing at old Martha Phibbs, who stood some paces away, and lowering her voice that she might not be overheard. "But for a time, at least, I mean to be your nurse, and look after your wants. You should have sent for me before, Aunt Jane." "Don't trouble yourself. Phibbs knows my ways, and does all that is required," said the invalid, rather testily. "Run away now, Louise. The housekeeper will show you to your room. It's opposite Elizabeth's, and you will do well to make her acquaintance at once. I shall expect you both to dine with me at 7. "Can't I stay here a little longer?" pleaded Louise. "We haven't spoken 2 words together as yet, and I'm not a bit tired or anxious to go to my room. What a superb oleander this is! Is it one of your favorites, Aunt Jane?" "Run away," repeated the woman. "I want to be alone." The girl sighed and kissed her again, stroking the gray hair softly with her white hand. "Very well, I'll go," she said. But I don't intend to be treated as a strange guest, dear aunt, for that would drive me to return home at once. You are my father's eldest sister, and I mean to make you love me, if you will give me the least chance to do so." She looked around her inquiringly, and Aunt Jane pointed a bony finger at the porch. "That is the way. Phibbs will take you to Misery, the housekeeper, and then return to me. Remember, I dine promptly at 7. "I shall count the minutes," said Louise, and with a laugh and a graceful gesture of adieu, turned to follow Martha into the house. Jane Merrick looked after her with a puzzled expression upon her face. "Were she in the least sincere," she muttered, "Louise might prove a very pleasant companion. But she's not sincere. She's coddling me to win my money, and if I don't watch out she'll succeed. The girl's a born diplomat, and weighed in the balance against sincerity, diplomacy will often tip the scales. I might do worse than to leave Elmhurst to a clever woman. But I don't know Beth yet. I'll wait and see which girl is the most desirable, and give them an equal chance." End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of Aunt Jane's Nieces. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Hilara. Aunt Jane's Nieces by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Cousins. "Come in," called Beth, answering a knock at her door. Louise entered, and with a little cry ran forward and caught Beth in her arms, kissing her in greeting. "You must be my new cousin, Cousin Elizabeth, and I'm awfully glad to see you at last," she said, holding the younger girl a little away that she might examine her carefully. Beth did not respond to the caress. She eyed her opponent sharply, for she knew well enough, even in that first moment, that they were engaged in a struggle for supremacy in Aunt Jane's affections, and that, in the battles to come, no quarter could be asked or expected. So they stood at arm's length, facing one another, and secretly forming an estimate each of the other's advantages and accomplishments. "She's pretty enough, but has no style whatever," was Louise's conclusion. "Neither has she tact, nor self-possession, or even a prepossessing manner. She wears her new gown in a dowdy manner, and one can read her face easily. There's little danger in this quarter, I'm sure, so I may as well be friends with the poor child." As for Beth, she saw at once that her new cousin was older and more experienced in the ways of the world, and therefore liable to prove a dangerous antagonist. Slender and graceful of form, attractive of feature, and dainty in manner, Louise must be credited with many advantages, but against these might be weighed her evident insincerity, the volubility and gush that are so often affected to hide one's real nature, and which so shrewd and suspicious a woman as Aunt Jane could not fail to readily detect. Altogether, Beth was not greatly disturbed by her cousin's appearance, and suddenly realizing that they had been staring at one another rather rudely, she said pleasantly enough, "Won't you sit down?" "Of course, we must get acquainted," replied Louise gaily, and perched herself, cross-legged, upon the window seat, surrounded by a mass of cushions. "I didn't know you were here until an hour ago," she continued. "But as soon as Aunt Jane told me, I ran to my room, unpacked and settled the few traps I brought with me, and here I am, prepared for a good long chat, and to love you just as dearly as you will let me." "I knew you were coming, but not until this morning," answered Beth slowly. "Perhaps, had I known, I would not have accepted our aunt's invitation." "Ah, why not?" inquired the other, as if in wonder. Beth hesitated. "Have you known Aunt Jane before today?" she asked. "No." "Nor I. The letter asking me to visit her was the first I have ever received from her. Even my mother, her own sister, does not correspond with her. I was brought up to hate her very name, as a selfish, miserly old woman. But since she asked me to visit her, we judged she had softened and might wish to become friendly, and so I accepted the invitation. I had no idea you were also invited." "But why should you resent my being here?" Louise asked, smiling. Surely, two girls will have a better time in this lonely old place than one could have alone. For my part, I am delighted to find you at Elmhurst." "Thank you," said Beth. "That's a nice thing to say, but I doubt if it's true. Don't let's beat around the bush. I hate hypocrisy, and if we're going to be friends, let's be honest with one another from the start." "Well?" queried Louise, apparently amused. "It's plain to me that Aunt Jane has invited us here to choose which one of us shall inherit her money and Elmhurst. She's old and feeble, and she hasn't any other relations." "Oh, yes, she has," corrected Louise. "You mean Patricia Doyle?" "Yes." "What do you know of her?" "Nothing at all." "Where does she live?" "I haven't the faintest idea." Louise spoke as calmly as if she had not mailed Patricia's defiant letter to Aunt Jane, or discovered her cousin's identity in the little hairdresser from Madame Baum's establishment. "Has Aunt Jane mentioned her?" continued Beth. "Not in my presence." "Then we may conclude she's left out of the arrangement," said Beth calmly. "And, as I said, Aunt Jane is likely to choose one of us to succeed her at Elmhurst. I hoped I had it all my own way, but it's evident I was mistaken. You'll fight for your own chance, and fight mighty hard." Louise laughed merrily. "How funny!" she exclaimed, after a moment during which Beth frowned at her darkly. "Why, my dear cousin, I don't want Aunt Jane's money." "You don't?" "Not a penny of it, nor Elmhurst, nor anything you can possibly lay claim to, my dear. My mother and I are amply provided for, and I am only here to find rest from my social duties and to get acquainted with my dead father's sister. That is all." "Oh," said Beth, lying back in her chair with a sigh of relief. "So it was really a splendid idea of yours to be frank with me at our first meeting," continued Louise cheerfully, "for it has led to your learning the truth, and I am sure you will never again grieve me by suggesting that I wish to supplant you in Aunt Jane's favor. Now, tell me something about yourself and your people. Are you poor?" "Poor as poverty," said Beth gloomily. "My father teaches music, and mother scolds him continually for not being able to earn enough money to keep out of debt." "Hasn't Aunt Jane helped you?" "We've never seen her cent of her money, although father has tried at times to borrow enough to help him out of his difficulties." "That's strange. She seems like such a dear, kindly old lady," said Louise musingly. "I think she's horrid," answered Beth angrily, "but I mustn't let her know it. I even kissed her when she asked me to, and it sent a shiver all down my back." Louise laughed with genuine amusement. "You must dissemble, Cousin Elizabeth," she advised, "and teach your aunt to love you. For my part, I am fond of everyone, and it delights me to fuss around invalids and assist them. I ought to have been a trained nurse, you know, but of course there's no necessity of my earning a living." "I suppose not," said Beth. Then, after a thoughtful silence, she resumed abruptly. "What's to prevent Aunt Jane leaving you her property, even if you are rich and don't need it? You say you like to care for invalids, and I don't. Suppose Aunt Jane prefers you to me, and wills you all her money?" "Why, that would be beyond my power to prevent," answered Louise, with a little yawn. Beth's face grew hard again. "You're deceiving me," she declared angrily. "You're trying to make me think you don't want Elmhurst when you're as anxious to get it as I am." "My dear Elizabeth, by the way, that's an awfully long name. What do they call you, Lizzie or Bessie or—" "They call me Beth," sullenly. "Then, my dear Beth, let me beg you not to borrow trouble or to doubt one who wishes to be your friend. Elmhurst would be a perfect bore to me. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I couldn't live in this out-of-the-way corner of the world, you know." "But suppose she leaves it to you," persisted Beth. "You wouldn't refuse it, I imagine." Louise seemed to meditate. "Cousin," she said at length, "I'll make a bargain with you. I can't refuse to love and pet Aunt Jane just because she has money and my sweet cousin Beth is anxious to inherit it. But I'll not interfere in any way with your chances, and I'll promise to sing your praises to our aunt persistently." Furthermore, in case she selects me as her heir, I will agree to transfer half of the estate to you, the half that consists of Elmhurst." "Is there much more?" asked Beth. "I haven't any list of Aunt Jane's possessions, so I don't know. But you shall have Elmhurst, if I get it, because the place would be of no use to me." "It's a magnificent estate," said Beth, looking at her cousin doubtfully. "It shall be yours, dear, whatever Aunt Jane decides. See, this is a compact, and I'll seal it with a kiss." She sprang up, and kneeling beside Beth, kissed her fervently. "Now shall we be friends?" she asked lightly. "Now will you abandon all those naughty suspicions and let me love you?" Beth hesitated. The suggestion seemed preposterous. Such generosity savoured of play acting, and Louise's manner was too airy to be genuine. Somehow she felt that she was being laughed at by this slender, graceful girl, who was scarcely older than herself, but she was too unsophisticated to know how to resent it. Louise insisted upon warding off her enmity, or at least establishing a truce, and Beth, however suspicious and ungracious, could find no way of rejecting the overtures. "Were I in your place," she said, "I would never promise to give up a penny of the inheritance. If I win it, I shall keep it all." "To be sure, I should want you to, my dear." "Then, since we have no cause to quarrel, we may as well become friends," continued Beth, her features relaxing a little their set expression. Louise laughed again, ignoring the other's briskness, and was soon chatting away pleasantly upon other subjects, and striving to draw Beth out of her natural reserve. The younger girl had no power to resist such fascinations. Louise knew the big world, and talked of it with such charming naivete, and Beth listened rapturously. Such a girl friend it had never been her privilege to have before, and when her suspicions were forgotten, she became fairly responsive, and brightened wonderfully. They dressed in time for dinner, and met Aunt Jane and Silas Watson, the lawyer, in the great drawing-room. The old gentleman was very attentive and courteous during the stately dinner, and did much to relieve the girl's embarrassment. Louise, indeed, seemed quite at home in her new surroundings, and chatted most vivaciously during the meal. But Aunt Jane was strangely silent, and Beth had little to say, and seemed awkward and ill at ease. The old lady retired to her own room shortly after dinner, and presently sent a servant to request Mr. Watson to join her. "Silas," she said when he entered, "what do you think of my nieces?" "They are very charming girls," he answered, "although they are at an age when few girls show to good advantage. Why did you not invite Kenneth to dinner, Jane?" "The boy?" "Yes, they would be more at ease in the society of a young gentleman more nearly their own age." "Kenneth is a bear. He is constantly saying disagreeable things. In other words, he is not gentlemanly, and the girls shall have nothing to do with him." "Very well," said the lawyer quietly. "Which of my nieces do you prefer?" asked the old lady after a pause. "I cannot say on so short an acquaintance," he answered with gravity. "Which do you prefer, Jane?" "They are equally unsatisfactory," she answered. "I cannot imagine Elmhurst belonging to either, Silas." Then she added with an abrupt change of manner, "You must go to New York for me at once." "Tonight?" "No, tomorrow morning. I must see that other niece, the one who defies me and refuses to answer my second letter." "Patricia Doyle?" "Yes. Find her and argue with her. Tell her I am a crabbed old woman with a whim to know her, and that I shall not die happy unless she comes to Elmhurst. Bribe her, threaten her, kidnap her if necessary, Silas, but get her to Elmhurst as quickly as possible." "I'll do my best, Jane, but why are you so anxious?" "My time is drawing near, old friend," she replied, less harshly than usual. "And this matter of my will lies heavily on my conscience. What if I should die tonight?" He did not answer. "There would be a dozen heirs to fight for my money, and dear old Elmhurst would be sold to strangers," she resumed, with bitterness. "But I don't need to cross over just yet, Silas, even if one limb is dead already. I shall hang on until I get this matter settled, and I can't settle it properly without seeing all three of my nieces. One of these is too hard, and the other too soft. I'll see what Patricia is like." "She may prove even more undesirable," said the lawyer. "In that case, I'll pack her back again and choose between these two. But you must fetch her, Silas, that I may know just what I am doing. And you must fetch her at once." "I'll do the best I can, Jane," repeated the old lawyer. End of chapter 9. Cousins. Chapter 10 of Aunt Jane's Nieces. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Hilara. Aunt Jane's Nieces by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. The Man with the Bundle. In the harness room above the stable sat Duncan Moore, the coachman and most important servant, with the exception of the head gardener, in Miss Merrick's establishment. Duncan, bald-headed but with white and bushy side whiskers, was engaged in the serious business of oiling and polishing the state harness, which had not been used for many months past, but that did not matter. Thursday was the day for oiling the harness, and so on Thursday he performed the task, never daring to entrust a work so important to a subordinate. In one corner of the little room, Kenneth Forbes squatted upon a bench with an empty pine box held carelessly in his lap. While Duncan worked, the boy was busy with his pencil, but neither had spoken for at least a half-hour. Finally, the aged coachman, without looking up, inquired, "What do you think o' 'em, Kenneth lad?" "Of whom, Don?" "The young leddies." "What young ladies?" "Miss Jane's nieces, as Oscar brought from the station yesterday." The boy looked astonished and leaned over the box in his lap eagerly. "Tell me, Don," he said. "I was away with my gun all yesterday and heard nothing of it." "Why, it seems Miss Jane's invited him to make her a visit." "But not yet, Don, not so soon." "Natheless, they're here." "How many, Don?" "Two, lad. A bonny young thing came on the morning train, and a nice wide-awake one by the 2 o'clock. "Girls!" with an accent of horror. "Young females, anyhow," said Donald, polishing a buckle briskly. The boy glared at him fixedly. "Will they be running about the place, Don?" "Most likely. 'Twould be a shame to shut them up with the poor missus this glad weather. But why not? They'll be company for ye, Kenneth lad." "How long will they stay?" "Maybe for aye. Oscar, forbys, one or the other of 'em will own the place when Miss Jane's gives up the ghost." The boy sat silent a moment, thinking upon this speech. Then, with a cry that was almost a scream, he dashed the box upon the floor and flew out the door as if crazed, and Donald paused to listen to his footsteps clattering down the stairs. Then the old man groaned dismally, shaking his side whiskers with a negative expression that might have conveyed worlds of meaning to one able to interpret it. But his eye fell upon the pine box, which had rolled to his feet, and he stooped to pick it up. Upon the smoothly planed side was his own picture, most deftly drawn, showing him engaged in polishing the harness. Every strap and buckle was depicted with rare fidelity. There was no doubt at all of the sponge and bottle on the stool beside him, or the cloth in his hand. Even his bow spectacles rested upon the bridge of his nose at exactly the right angle, and his underlip protruded just as it had done since he was a lad. Donald was not only deeply impressed by such an exhibition of art, he was highly gratified at being pictured, and full of wonder that the boy could do such a thing. "Wi' a wee pencil and a bit o' board." He turned the box this way and that to admire the sketch, and finally arose and brought a hatchet, with which he carefully pried the board away from the box. Then he carried his treasure to a cupboard, where he hid it safely behind a row of tall bottles. Meantime, Kenneth had reached the stable, thrown a bridle over the head of a fine sorrel mare, and scorning to use his saddle, leaped upon her back, and dashed down the lane, and out at the rear gate upon the old turnpike road. His head was whirling with amazement, his heart full of indignation. Girls! Girls! At Elmhurst! Nieces and guests of the fierce old woman he so bitterly hated. Then indeed his days of peace and quiet were ended. These dreadful creatures would prowl around everywhere. They might even penetrate the shrubbery to the foot of the stairs leading to his own retired room. They would destroy his happiness and drive him mad. For this moody, silent youth had been strangely happy in his life at Elmhurst, despite the neglect of the grim old woman who was its mistress, and the fact that no one aside from Lawyer Watson seemed to care whether he lived or died. Perhaps Donald did. Good old Don was friendly and seldom bothered him by talking. Perhaps old Misery liked him a bit also. But these were only servants, and almost as helpless and dependent as himself. Still, he had been happy. He began to realize it now that these awful girls had come to disturb his peace. The thought filled him with grief and rebellion and resentment. Yet there was nothing he could do to alter the fact that Donald's young females were already here and prepared, doubtless, to stay. The sorrel was dashing down the road at a great pace, but the boy clung firmly to his seat and gloried in the breeze that fanned his hot cheeks. Away and away he raced until he reached the crossroads, miles away, and down this he turned and galloped as recklessly as before. The sun was hot today, and the sorrel's flanks began to steam and show flecks of white upon their glossy surface. He turned again to the left, entering upon a broad highway that would lead him straight home at last. But he had almost reached the little village of Elmwood, which was the railway station, before he realized his cruelty to the splendid mare he bestrode. Then indeed he fell to a walk, patting Nora's neck affectionately and begging her to forgive him for his thoughtlessness. The mare tossed her head in derision. However she might sweat and pant, she liked the glorious pace even better than her rider. Through the village he paced moodily, the bridle dangling loosely on the mare's neck. The people paused to look at him curiously, but he had neither word nor look for any. He did not know one of them by name, and cared little how much they might speculate upon his peculiar position at the big house. Then, riding slowly up the hedge-bordered road, his troubles once more assailed him, and he wondered if there was not some spot upon the broad earth to which he could fly for retirement until the girls had left Elmhurst for good. Nora shied, and he looked up to discover that he had nearly run down a pedestrian, a stout little man with a bundle under his arm, who held up one hand as if to arrest him. Involuntarily he drew rein, and stopped beside the traveller with a look of inquiry. "Sorry to trouble you, sir," remarked the little man in a cheery voice, "but I ain't just certain about my way." "Where do you want to go?" asked the boy. "To Jane Merrick's place. They call it Elmhurst, I guess." "It's straight ahead," said Kenneth, as the mare walked on. His questioner also started and paced beside him. "Far from here?" "A mile, perhaps." "They said it was 3 from the village, but I guess I've come a dozen already." The boy did not reply to this. There was nothing offensive in the man's manner. He spoke with an easy familiarity that made it difficult not to respond with equal frank cordiality, and there was a shrewd expression upon his wrinkled, smooth-shaven face that stamped him a man who had seen life in many of its phases. Kenneth, who resented the companionship of most people, seemed attracted by the man, and hesitated to gallop on and leave him. "Know Jane Merrick?" asked the stranger. The boy nodded. "Like her?" "I hate her," he said savagely. The man laughed a bit uneasily. "Then it's the same Jane as ever," he responded, with a shake of his grizzled head. "Do you know, I sort of hoped she'd reformed, and I'd be glad to see her again. They tell me she's got money." The boy looked at him in surprise. "She owns Elmhurst, and has mortgages on a dozen farms around here, and property in New York, and thousands of dollars in the bank," he said. "Aunt Jane's rich." "Aunt Jane?" echoed the man quickly. "What's your name, lad?" "Kenneth Forbes." A shake of the head. "Don't recollect any Forbeses in the family." "She isn't really my aunt," said the boy, "and she doesn't treat me as an aunt either. But she's my guardian, and I've always called her aunt, rather than say Miss Merrick." "She's never married, has she?" "No, she was engaged to my Uncle Tom, who owned Elmhurst. He was killed in a railway accident, and then it was found he'd left her all he had." "I see. So when my parents died, Aunt Jane took me for Uncle Tom's sake, and keeps me out of charity." "I see," quite soberly this time. The boy slid off the mare and walked beside the little man, holding the bridle over his arm. They did not speak again for some moments. Finally, the stranger asked, "Are Jane's sisters living, Julia and Violet?" "I don't know, but there are two of her nieces at Elmhurst." "Ha! Who are they?" "Girls," with bitterness. "I haven't seen them." The stranger whistled. "Don't like girls, I take it?" "No, I hate them." Another long pause. Then the boy suddenly turned questioner. "You know Aunt Miss Merrick, sir?" "I used to, when we were both younger." "Any relation, sir?" "Just a brother, that's all." Kenneth stopped short, and the mare stopped, and the little man, with a whimsical smile at the boy's astonishment, also stopped. "I didn't know she had a brother, sir. That is, living." "She had two, but Will's dead years ago, I'm told. I'm the other." "John Merrick?" "That's me. I went west a long time ago, before you were born, I guess. We don't get much news on the coast, so I sort of lost track of the folks back east. And I reckon they lost track of me for the same reason." "You were the tinsmith?" "The same. Bad pennies always return, they say. I've come back to look up the family and find how many are left. Curious sort of job, isn't it?" "I don't know. Perhaps it's natural," replied the boy, reflectively. "But I'm sorry you came to Aunt Jane first." "Why?" "She's in bad health. Quite ill, you know, and her temper's dreadful. Perhaps she "I know, but I haven't seen her in years, and after all, she's my sister. And back at the old home, where I went first, no one knew anything about what had become of the family except Jane. They kept track of her because she suddenly became rich and a great lady, and that was a surprising thing to happen to a Merrick. We've always been a poor lot, you know." The boy glanced at the bundle pityingly, and the little man caught the look and smiled his sweet, cheery smile. "My valise was too heavy to carry," he said, "so I wrapped up a few things in case Jane wanted me to stay overnight. And that's why I didn't get a horse at the livery, you know. Somebody'd have to take it back again." "I'm sure she'll ask you to stay, sir. And if she doesn't, you come out to the stable and let me know, and I'll drive you to town again. Donald, that's the coachman, is my friend, and he'll let me have the horse if I ask him." "Thank you, lad," returned the man, gratefully. "I thought a little exercise would do me good, but this 3 miles has seemed like 30 to me." "We're here at last," said the boy, turning into the driveway. "Seeing that you're her brother, sir, I advise you to go right up to the front door and ring the bell." "I will," said the man. "I always go around the back way myself." "I see." The boy turned away, but in a moment halted again. His interest in Miss Jane's brother John was extraordinary. "Another thing," he said, hesitating. "Well?" "You'd better not say you met me, you know. It wouldn't be a good introduction. She hates me as much as I hate her." "Very good, my lad. I'll keep mum." The boy nodded and turned away to lead Nora to the stable. The man looked after him a moment and shook his head sadly. "Poor boy," he whispered. Then he walked up to the front door and rang the bell. End of chapter 10. The Man with the Bundle.